Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Wednesday? Sharon in New Jersey, Gail in Kansas City, Bella in Florida, Nancy in North Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Yehud in South Carolina, Shandor in the Bronx, Tom in PA, Karen in Northern California, Moshe in Brooklyn, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Chaim in Florida, Lester in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Elise in Virginia, Marie in Freeport, and Bill in Missouri. Welcome, everybody. Today's class is sponsored by Daniel Vizana, who says, I would like to honor my mother, Helen Vizana. Her yard site, if that would be appropriate, was on the 12th of March. She passed in 1995 at the age of 81. I've been trying to learn Talmud in Hebrew with a few different rabbis online since approximately 2017, with difficulty. Around 2018, I found your course in Daf Yomi and watch it most afternoons while pumping my ellipse. You make it much clearer than all the others, especially with your explanations. Sanhedrin and Brachos are the most interesting so far to me, although the death penalties are difficult to hear. Thank you for your energy and dedication. Thank you, Daniel. May your mom's neshama have a great aliyah in the world of souls. We say amen. And may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings in the merit of enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And we say amen. All right, page 18 here in Tractate Menachot, the 30th volume of the Talmud. We're picking this up about two-thirds. 17b was quite a short daf, so kind of like halfway to two-thirds on 17b. Then we'll get into 18. We're continuing, and today, God willing, we'll complete our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 3. So the Gemara clarifies, in accordance with whose opinion is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda that the offering is unfit, even if he intends only to leave the blood for the next day, but not present it or consume it, right? So yesterday we were talking about the idea that if you had what would otherwise be a pigul intent, right, to eat some of the remainder beyond its deadline, or in the case, let's say, of something that's going to be burned on the altar, to burn it beyond its deadline. So then it would become pigul. But if when he's removing the handful or burning the handful on the altar, he is having an intention to eat that which is burned the next day, like eating the handful. The handful is not for consumption by a person, it's for burning on the altar. Or he's having in mind to burn the remainder of the meal offering, that which should be eaten, and he has in mind to burn it. So then his pigul intent is with regard to something that is not normally done, that is not done, and therefore it's like a meaningless intent and it won't render the offering pigul. Okay, so here they're now testing our understanding of that principle by going back to animal offerings, right? And yesterday at the end we were saying, well, what if he had in mind to consume the blood? Now, if a Jew eats blood, you're violating the prohibition of eating blood. That would be a separate charge, so to speak. But the question here is, okay, when an animal offering is brought, it's slaughtered in the courtyard of the Holy Temple when the temple is standing, right? That's when we bring offerings, and we haven't in nearly 2,000 years. But when the temple was standing, if you brought an animal offering and you slaughtered it properly and collected the blood, and you were going to convey the blood, and you were, going to then sprinkle the blood on the altar. But at the time of slaughter, let's say, you had in mind that you were going to eat that blood and to eat it beyond its time, right? Beyond the time of validity for this offering. So that's not going to render it pigul because we don't eat the blood, right? And so this would be this equivalent to having in mind to eat the handful of a meal offering, which is normally burned, or to burn the remainder of a meal offering. Eating the blood is something we don't do. So the fact that you are planning to do that beyond its deadline, or let's say beyond the deadline for eating the edible portion of a sin offering, the fact that you are planning to eat the blood beyond that deadline is not going to render the offering pigul because we don't eat that blood. That blood is meant to be presented on the altar. So now they're asking another little nuanced variation on that question. Okay, well, let's say he did not plan to eat the blood, but he had in mind to leave the blood over beyond its time. Because what are you supposed to do, right? So let's say the offering in question is a sin offering, an animal offering brought as a sin offering. So what would you do? You'd slaughter it in the northern part of the courtyard because it's an offering of the most holy, of the highest sanctity. So you'd have to slaughter in the northern part of the courtyard, and then the one slaughtering it doesn't have to be a priest, but the one receiving its blood of the soul once it was slaughtered, that has to be a priest, and he has to receive it in a service vessel. We learned so many other things. It has to be standing. He has to be holding the service vessel in his right hand. His feet have to be bare because he's standing on the floor of the temple. Okay, those are all other nuances we're not dealing with now. But he's going to receive the blood, convey it to the altar, and sprinkle it there. And that sprinkling does have to be done by the deadline. So if he had in mind that he was going to sprinkle the blood beyond the time when that offering is supposed to be eaten, right? Beyond this day and the night afterward. So that sounds like, so sprinkling late, presenting the blood late, that might render the offering pigul. But he's not saying, I'm going to sprinkle it tomorrow. He's just saying, I'm going to leave over some of the blood. Now, normally, after the sprinkling is done, there is the remainder of the blood. Now, once the sprinkling is done, that offering has become effective. It has done what it was supposed to do. But if you had in mind at the outset, what do you do with the blood that's left over after the sprinkling, right? That doesn't get presented on the corners of the altar. That gets poured out on the base of the altar, as we've learned. So what they're saying now is, okay, well, what if at the time of slaughtering the animal, you have in mind that you're not going to pour out the remainder of the blood within the deadline. You're just going to leave some of it just standing around. Is that going to be enough to make the offering pigul? Right. So that's the question here. And there's going to be, they're also going to ask, well, are you talking about leaving all the blood over, which would necessarily imply that none of it was sprinkled? Or are you saying that after the sprinkling was done, the remainder is not going to get poured out on the base? It's going to be left sitting around. So let's see. So in accordance with whose opinion is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, that the offering is unfit, even if he intends only to leave the blood for the next day, but not present it, right, not sprinkle it, or consume it. Let's also keep in mind that if he's saying unfit, there were three ways that this could go, right? If like you have an intent to leave something over beyond its time, it could be rendered pigul, and then if somebody ate of that, he'd be liable to kares for eating something that was pigul. Or if, for example, he had in mind at the outset that he was going to move the edible part of that animal offering outside of its place, right? It's going to leave the courtyard. That would render the offering unfit, but not pigul. Or he might have a meaningless intent, or an intent that just doesn't render the offering unfit, in which case it would still be fit. So in that middle category, unfit, but not pigul. So in accordance with whose opinion is this statement of Rabbi Yehuda that the offering is unfit, even if he intends only to leave the blood for the next day but not present it or consume it. So if we say that this opinion is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, now consider, and if there where the priest expresses his intention using the language of consumption, the rabbis nevertheless deem the offering fit, right? Again, if you had an intent to eat that which is normally burned, even though it's beyond its time, the rabbis say you haven't said anything at all, because you're talking about eating something that's normally burned. That's a meaningless statement in terms of triggering that the offering could become unfit, or even more, that the offering could become pigul. The rabbis say no. If you're intending to eat something that is normally burned, and even though you're intending to do that beyond its time, the offering remains fit. Right? So if we say that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, now consider, and if there, where the priest expresses his intention using the language of eating, right, consuming, the rabbis nevertheless deem the offering fit, despite the fact that if he had used his expression with regard to the portion burned on the altar, the offering would be pigul. In other words, if the person had intended to burn that which is normally burned beyond its time, then he would have made it pigul. If he had intention to eat that which is normally burned, it would not. And the reason they're talking about the language of consumption is simply because you might use that same verb, which normally would mean eat, right? It means eating. Here we're translating as consuming, because the word consuming in English could be used for either eating with your mouth or burning on the altar, right? But if it's clear that the guy's intending to eat with his mouth that which is normally burned, it would not become pigul, even though that verb is the same verb. Right? And if there, where the priest expresses his intention using the language of consuming, and the rabbis nevertheless deem the offering fit, despite the fact that if he had used this expression with regard to the portion burned on the altar, and he was going to burn it beyond its time, then the offering would be pigul. Is it not all the more so the case that here, where he intends only to leave the blood until the next day, the offering should be fit? He's not planning on eating something that is normally eaten beyond its time. He's just planning on leaving the blood sitting around. Why should that render it pigul? It should just remain fit. So rather, it must be that Rabbi Yehuda's statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. And yet, the Baraisa continues, Rabbi Elazar said, even in this case, Rabbi Elazar deems the offering unfit, and the rabbis deem it fit. So if Rabbi Yehuda's statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, then the explanation of Rabbi Elazar about Rabbi Elazar's opinion is identical to that of Rabbi Yehuda, and there does not appear to be any disagreement between the two. So rather, is it not so that the difference between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda is with regard to liability for kares? Now, liability for kares would only be if an offering was rendered pigul and then someone ate from that pigul offering. So the difference lies in that Rabbi Yehuda holds that if one's intention is to leave the blood for the next day, then according to Rabbi Elazar, the offering is only rendered unfit, whereas in those cases listed in the Mishna, such as where one's intention is to eat the sacrificial portions on the next day, he would be liable to receive kares as well, not just unfit, but pigul. And Rabbi Elazar comes to say that according to Rabbi Elazar, both in this case and in that case, the offering is unfit, but there is no liability for kares for eating it, which would mean not pigul. Now, the Gemara rejects this understanding of the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and how it relates to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Elazar. Gemara says no. It may be that everyone agrees that according to Rabbi Elazar, in a case where one's intention is to eat after its designated time an item that is usually burned, or to burn an item that is usually eaten, there is no liability to receive kares. Pigul could not possibly apply. And here there are three disputes with regard to the matter. The first Tana holds that the rabbis and Rabbi Elazar disagree only in those cases with regard to whether the offering is rendered unfit due to the intention to eat an item that is usually burned or to burn an item that is usually eaten. But with regard to leaving of its blood until the next day, everyone agrees that the offering is fit, meaning your intention didn't do anything at all to the offering. It remains fit. Now, we're at the top of page 18a. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that the rabbis and Rabbi Elazar disagree only in those cases where one's intention is to drink the blood or burn the meat of the offering, Again, this would be doing something that is not normally done, right? We never drink the blood. And when you talk about burning the meat, you're saying you're going to put on the altar something that should have been eaten, either by the owners of a peace offering or by the priests if it's a sin offering. So in those cases, the rabbis deem the offering fit, since the improper intention with respect to time only involves making use of an item in an unusual manner, right? Eating blood or eating that which is burned. But if one's intention is to leave of its blood until the next day, everyone agrees that the offering is unfit. And what is the reason for this? It is a rabbinic decree disqualifying the offering when some of its blood is left over until the next day, due to the concern that a priest may intend to leave over all of its blood. And if one's intention is to leave all of its blood until the next day, well then, of course, the offering is rendered unfit by Torah law, because if he's intending to not sprinkle the blood, which has to be done, right? So leaving the remainder of the blood after the sprinkling lying around, instead of pouring it out on the base of the altar, would actually not disqualify the offering. It would not render the offering unfit by Torah law. But the rabbis issued a decree as a protective fence around the Torah so that people wouldn't come to violate the Torah. They issued a rabbinic decree saying, no, if he's intending to leave over the blood and not pour it out on the base, that's going to render the offering unfit, due to the concern that, in the beginning he might just think, well, I'm not going to pour out all the blood. I'll just get around to that later. I don't want to make a mess. I don't want to get my frock dirty or something. But then he might start to think, yeah, well, it's okay not to pour out the blood. And then he might bring an offering and never sprinkle its blood at all. And that would be a much bigger violation. As it is taught in the Baraisa, Rabbi Yehuda said to the rabbis, do you not concede to me that if he left the blood until the next day without presenting it, right? He never sprinkled it. He just collected the blood at the time of slaughter in a service vessel, conveyed it to the altar, but he never sprinkled it, right? In that situation, Rabbi Yehuda is saying to the rabbis, surely you agree with me, right? Do you not concede to me that if he left the blood until the next day without presenting it, that the offering is unfit? Everyone would agree to that. So therefore, if he intended to leave the blood until the next day, it is also unfit. If he actually did leave it over to the next day and never presented it, that offering was rendered unfit. Therefore, if he has that intent at the outset, the offering is also rendered unfit. And Rabbi Elazar comes to say that even in this case, Rabbi Elazar deems the offering unfit, and the rabbis deem it fit. As there is no distinction between a case where one intended to drink of the blood on the next day, an unusual, and otherwise obviously prohibited, but the point is, that's not what we do with blood. We don't eat it, we sprinkle it, right? And so that's not having such an intent, wrong as it is, won't render the offering unfit. And so if that's not going to render the offering unfit, then just leaving it lying around is also not going to render the offering unfit. Though I think we're making that distinction between he's not planning to leave all of it lying around, he's just planning to leave some of it lying around after the sprinkling. That's not clearly defined. As there is no distinction between a case where one intended to drink of the blood on the next day and where one intended to merely leave the blood until the next day. So now the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Yehuda in fact hold that if one's intention is to leave some of the blood, important distinction, to leave some of the blood until the next day, then everyone agrees that the offering is unfit? But isn't it taught in the Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, said, when I went to Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua to clarify my knowledge, and some say that Rebbe said, when I went to clarify the knowledge of, i.e. to study under Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, I found Yosef the Babylonian sitting before Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, and every ruling that Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua taught was especially dear to him, right? Yosef the Babylonian was excited to be in the class of Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, was like drinking in his teachings, right? And every teaching was especially dear to him until they began discussing one law. When Yosef the Babylonian said to him, "My teacher, with regard to one who slaughters the offering with the intention to leave some of its blood for the next day, what is the law?" And Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said to him, "The offering is fit." And Yosef the Babylonian repeated this question that evening, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said to him that the offering is fit. And he asked it again the following morning, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said to him that the offering is fit. And once again he asked the question at noon, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said to him that the offering is fit. And when he asked the question yet another time, that late afternoon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said to him, "I hold that the offering is fit, but Rabbi Eliezer deems it unfit." And then Yosef the Babylonian's face lit up, tzahavu panav, with joy. And Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said to him, "Yosef, it seems to me that our laws," meaning my laws that I've been teaching to you, "were not accurate until now, when I said that the offering is fit." And Yosef the Babylonian said to him, "My teacher, yes, I agree with you that the offering is fit. As you said, leaving over some of the blood, or having an intention to leave over some of the blood at the time of slaughter, is not going to render this offering unfit. It's going to remain fit, because you're just talking about leaving something over. You're not talking about consuming the edible part beyond its time or burning the burnable part beyond its time. You're just going to leave some of the blood over. That's not going to render the offering unfit, and I agree with you. But my reluctance," says Yosef the Babylonian, "my reluctance to accept your statement was due to the fact that Rabbi Yehuda taught me that the offering is unfit. And I went around to all of Rabbi Yehuda's disciples, seeking another disciple who had also heard this from him. But I could not find one. And I thought that I must have been mistaken. Now that you have taught me that Rabbi Eliezer deems it unfit, you have returned to me that which I had lost." I thought I was going crazy. I agree with you that the offering is fit, but I know I heard my teacher say that it was unfit, and yet it seems like no one else heard that. And now I'm hearing from you, yes, Rabbi Eliezer deems it unfit, so I'm not crazy. I must have heard that from Rabbi Yehuda. And I'll just mention in passing, it's a pet peeve of mine. I've probably mentioned this before. You know, if you go to 7-Eleven, let's say you stop there every day and you get the cup of coffee, you know, and every day it's $1.50. And then you come in one day and it's $1.75. So you comment, the price went up. And the guy looks at you and is like, "No, it's always been $1.75. I know it's $1.50. Maybe you don't go in every day. Maybe you come in every few days. And by the time you come in, it's a new, guy at the counter. And for him, it's always been $1.75. But this idea that, things change in our world, and so quickly everyone accepts the new reality. And no one can remember that it didn't used to be that way. Right? So the Brisa continues. Upon hearing this, Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua's eyes streamed with tears. And he said, "Happy are you, Torah scholars, for whom matters of Torah are exceedingly dear." Right? He's commented at Yosef the Babylonian that he was so excited to hear this ruling. Right? He already knew that the law is that the offering is fit in this situation, and everyone agrees with him that the offering is fit. But he wanted to know, why do I have this impression that Rabbi Yehuda said it's not fit? And no one remembers that, right? He's like desperately trying to ask everybody to find out who it is that held the minority opinion and where did it come from. That's how important it was to him to have the tradition solidly locked in. It's not enough just to know what the law is and just to know what the majority ruling is. He wants to know the kind of procedural history of the law and who disagrees with it and why and where that comes from. Right? It's important to him. It's emotionally important to him. And so Elazar ben Shemua was crying. He says, "Happy are you Torah scholars for whom matters of Torah are exceedingly dear." And Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua recited this verse about Yosef the Babylonian. "Oh, how I love your Torah. It is my meditation all the day." From Psalm 119. That's a very long psalm, the longest psalm. That's why it's Psalm 119, verse 97. And he continued, "Because Rabbi Yehuda is the son of Rabbi Eli, and Rabbi Eli is the student of Rabbi Elazar, therefore Rabbi Yehuda taught you the Mishna of Rabbi Elazar that the offering is unfit." And the Gemara explains its objection. All of this was to get us back to, well, just having an intention to leave over some of the blood doesn't render the offering unfit, or can it? Right? So the Gemara explains its objection. "And if it enters your mind that Rabbi Yehuda taught Yosef the Babylonian that all agree that the offering is unfit, what did Yosef the Babylonian mean when he said to Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, 'You have returned to me that which I had lost'? Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua had said to him only that whether the offering is rendered unfit is subject to a dispute. And Yosef the Babylonian would have been taught that all agree that it is unfit. So rather, what is it that Rabbi Yehuda taught Yosef the Babylonian? Did he teach him that the rabbis deem the offering fit and Rabbi Eliezer deems it unfit? If that is so, what did Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua mean when he said that it was only because Rabbi Yehuda was the son of Rabbi Eli, who was the student of Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Yehuda taught this dispute? According to Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, we too teach this dispute. So the fact that Rabbi Yehuda taught both opinions in a dispute does not require justification, right? If they're teaching you what the law is, it's one thing. If they teach you, well, this is what the law ended up being, but there's a dispute among the earlier generation, right? The rabbis versus Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, well, it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda taught that and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua taught that. So what was different? What was lost that Yosef the Babylonian regained in this conversation? So rather, it must be that actually Rabbi Yehuda taught Yosef the Babylonian that all agree that the offering is unfit. And what did Yosef the Babylonian mean when he said, "You have returned it to me, that which I had lost"? He meant that Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua had in any event returned to him that there is some opinion in the world concerning the unfitness of the offering if one's intention was to leave over the blood until the next day, and his answer reassured Yosef the Babylonian that there is in fact such an opinion. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 3. We'll move on to Mishnah number 2. Continuing the theme of which errors can be made when a meal offering is brought that do not render the meal offering unfit. Okay, Mishnah number 2. If one did not pour the oil onto the meal offering, or he did not mix the oil into the meal offering, or did not break the loaves into pieces, or did not add salt, or did not wave the Omer meal offering, or the meal offering of a sota, or did not bring the meal offering to the altar, or if it happened that the priest broke the meal offerings that require breaking into greater pieces than appropriate, or did not smear oil on the wafers requiring this, in all these cases, the meal offering is fit. Now, at least some of the items in that list, weren't they indispensable to bringing an offering? Didn't we learn that salt has to accompany every offering? Didn't we learn that oil is a part of every meal offering that has oil as part of it? Right? The meal offering of a sinner doesn't have oil, nor the meal offering of jealousy, but all the other meal offerings do. So how could it be that this Mishnah is saying that if you didn't pour the oil into it, it doesn't matter. The meal offering remains fit. But let's be a little bit more precise about what we're reading, right? If who did not pour the oil? The question that might be being asked here is, if the oil got poured, but it wasn't poured by a priest, would that render the offering unfit? Perhaps not. So let's keep reading. That was the Gemara. That was the Mishnah. Now we open the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what does the Mishnah mean when it states that if one did not pour the oil onto the meal offering is fit? If we say that it means that he did not pour oil at all, that is difficult. Doesn't the verse write with regard to the pouring of the oil that doing so is indispensable? Is indispensable. Rather, the Mishnah must be referring to a case where a priest did not pour the oil onto the meal offering, but a non-priest did pour it. Right? So this is a little bit equivalent to slaughtering with an animal offering. Remember that slaughtering does not have to be done by a priest. Collecting the blood, conveying it to the altar, and sprinkling it on the altar does need to be done by a priest. So in the world of meal offerings, what has to be done by a priest and what doesn't? So the Gemara notes, if so, that the first clause of the Mishnah is understood in this manner, then the next law in the Mishnah, if one did not mix the oil into the meal offering, should also be understood as referring to a case where a priest did not mix the oil into the meal offering, but a non-priest did mix it, and so it remains fit. Well, this would indicate that if one did not mix the oil into the meal offering at all, then the meal offering would be unfit. And now we're on page 18b. And the Gemara challenges this understanding and says, but didn't we learn in a Mishnah, meaning won't we learn in a Mishnah, that's on page 103 of this tractate, right? But didn't we learn in a Mishnah that one who volunteers to bring a meal offering of 61 tenths of an ephah of flour, right? So an ephah of flour, is a certain measure, and a tenth of that is a valid meal offering. So somebody is volunteering to bring a 60-fold amount of flour as his offering, right? 60 times larger than a standard tenth of an ephah of flour offering. Okay, well, why is that relevant? Well, not because he's bringing 60, but because he's bringing 61 times a tenth of an ephah. And why is that relevant? Let's keep reading. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah that one who volunteers to bring a meal offering of 61 tenths of an ephah of flour must bring a meal offering of 60 tenths of an ephah in one vessel, and a meal offering of 1/10 of an ephah in a second vessel? Why? Because 60 tenths of an ephah of flour can be properly mixed with a log of oil. So the log is the amount of oil that we mix into a meal offering. And, you can bring up to 60 standard size meal offerings and still you can mix it with a log of oil. But beyond that, you don't have enough oil. So you're going to have to split it up. Right? 60 tenths of an ephah of flour can be properly mixed with a log of oil, but 61 tenths cannot be properly mixed with the oil. And we discussed it and asked, even if 61 tenths of an ephah do not mix with one log of oil, what of it? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah here that although there is a mitzvah to mix the oil into the meal offering, if one did not mix the oil into it, the meal offering is still fit? This would suggest that, okay, well, that's the right ratio, that's the right idea when you're mixing oil into an offering. But if you don't mix any oil into it, the offering is nevertheless fit. And Rabbi Elazar said the following explanation: for any measure of flour that is suitable for mixing with oil in a meal offering, the lack of mixing does not invalidate the meal offering. Even though there is a mitzvah to mix the oil and the flour ab initio, the meal offering is fit for sacrifice even if the oil and the flour are not mixed. Sounds like the oil and the flour are both being brought, but they didn't get mixed. And then it remains fit. And for any measure of flour that is not suitable for mixing with oil in a meal offering, the lack of mixing invalidates the meal offering. I find this very confusing. When they say not suitable, are they saying that like you bought 61 tenths? So therefore it's not suitable because you have too much flour for the oil? And in that case, if you don't at least mix some of it in, this thing is totally unfit? I'm not sure. This discussion demonstrates that when the Mishnah here says that the oil was not mixed into the meal offering, it means that it was not mixed at all. Therefore, the Mishnah's statement that the meal offering is fit even if the oil was not poured should be understood as referring to a case where the oil was never poured, I guess measured out, and not, as the Gemara inferred, as referring to a case where a non-priest poured it. So the Gemara refutes this proof. Are the cases comparable? This case is as it is, and that case is as it is. When the Mishnah states, if one did not pour the oil into the meal offering, it is referring to a case where a priest did not pour the oil into the meal offering, but a non-priest did pour it. And when it states, if one did not mix the oil into the meal offering, it means he did not mix the oil at all. We can't learn out elements of one law to another because they're discussing different classifications of issue, and we're not going to be able to learn out a law from one to the other. Next topic. The Mishnah teaches, or if it happened that the priest broke the meal offerings that require breaking, we're back to our Mishnah, right? So if it happened that the priest broke the meal offerings that require breaking into greater pieces than appropriate, the meal offering is fit. So what does that mean? So when a meal offering is brought and it's baked into some kind of a loaf, it's unleavened bread. It could be soft, could be hard. There's different types of meal offerings depending on how it's prepared. But once it's baked into some kind of a bread, a flat bread, before it gets offered, it needs to be broken, right? Broken down a little bit, broken into pieces. Are there measurements for those pieces? Of course there are measurements for those pieces. And here the question is, what they're asking is, well, the Mishnah is a little ambiguous. What does it mean if you broke it into pieces that are greater than appropriate? Does that mean that you left the pieces too big? You didn't break them down enough? Or does it mean that you broke it too many times and you ended up with pieces that are too small? That's what's being asked. Or if it happened that the priest broke the meal offerings that require breaking into greater pieces, pitim merubot, than appropriate, that the meal offering remains fit. So the Gemara asks, now that it has already been stated in the Mishnah, that if one did not break the loaves into pieces at all, nevertheless the meal offering remains fit, is it necessary to state that if one broke the meal offering into greater pieces than appropriate, the meal offering is fit? And the Gemara answers, what does the expression pitin merubot mean? It means that he increased riba, the amount of the meal offering's pieces, by breaking the loaves into many pieces that were each smaller than an olive bulk. And even though you did that, it's still going to remain fit, but you needed to teach it. And if you wish, say instead that the Mishnah is actually referring literally to large pieces, and it was necessary to teach this explicitly, lest you say that the meal offering is fit there when the loaves are not broken at all, since they have the status of loaves. But here, when the loaves are broken into excessively large pieces and no longer have the status of loaves, as they have been broken up, but still do not have the status of pieces, as they are not the correct size, the offering is not fit. You might have thought that. Therefore, it is necessary for the Mishnah to teach us this law explicitly. Next topic. Based on the Gemara's earlier inference that when the Mishnah states that the meal offering is valid, even if the priest did not pour the oil, it is referring to a case where a non-priest did perform that action. About this, the Gemara suggests, let us say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. What does Rabbi Shimon say? As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon says, any priest who does not admit to the validity of the sacrificial rites has no portion in the gifts of the priesthood. The Torah lays out 24 specific gifts that inure to the priests who are serving in the temple, or maybe not even, some of them, they don't have to be serving in the temple. right? But we've talked many times about in the sin offering, right? The edible parts of a sin offering, who gets to eat them? The priest. That is a gift to the priest. A burnt offering. Well, a burnt offering is entirely consumed by the altar, but not entirely, because its hide is removed before it's burned on the altar. Who gets the hide? The priests do. Teruma. Who gets teruma? The priests do. Right? So there are certain things that are set apart for the priests. Who set them apart for the priests? God did. God said the priests get those gifts. How do we know that God said that? Because he dictated it to Moses, who wrote it in the Torah. Right? So what they're going to get at here is that, well, if a priest doesn't hold by the Torah, if he thinks that the Torah is make-believe, or that it kind of came from God, but kind of not, if his heart isn't in it as a matter of faith, of strong faith, okay, well, then he gives up his right to receive those gifts. That seems quite logical to me. Right, so Rabbi Shimon says, as is Tana B'Raisa, Rabbi Shimon says, any priest who does not admit to the validity of the sacrificial rites has no portion in the gifts of the priesthood. As it is stated, Leviticus 7:33, he, among the sons of Aaron, that offers the blood of the peace offerings and the fat, shall have the right thigh for a portion. Right, that's the priestly portion of peace offerings. Peace offerings are mostly eaten by their owners, but there's a special part of the peace offering that is a gift to the priests. And this teaches that one who admits to the validity of the sacrificial rites and accepts responsibility for them has a portion for the priestly gifts, has a portion in the priestly gifts. But one who does not admit to the validity of the sacrificial rites does not have a portion in the priestly gifts. You can't say you believe in the Torah and Moses and the tradition and everything that we have faith in. Priests can't say, I don't believe in that, but yeah, give me the priestly gifts. It's either all in or not in at all. The B'Raisa continues, and I have derived only that a priest does not have a share in the priestly gifts if he does not admit to the validity of these rites of the presenting of the blood or the burning of the fats alone, which are the sacrificial rites of a slaughtered offering, as those rites are enumerated in the verse. From where is it derived that this law also includes one who does not admit to the validity of the 15 sacrificial rites performed by the priests? Now we're starting to see why this is being brought up in this context, right? The priests are going to get certain things whether they did the action or not. That slaughtering doesn't have to be done by a priest, but collecting the blood, conveying it to the altar, and sprinkling it does have to be done by a priest. The B'Raisa explains that this Gemara is now quoting. These are the rites of a meal offering, R-I-T-E-S, like the rituals of a meal offering, i.e. the pouring of the oil, the mixing, the breaking, the salting, the waving, the bringing of the offering to the altar, the removal of the handful, and the burning of the handful on the altar. And it includes other rites as well. The pinching of the nape of the neck of a bird offering, and the receiving of the blood in a vessel, and the sprinkling of the blood, and the giving of water to a woman suspected by her husband of having been unfaithful, the sota, and the ritual of breaking a heifer's neck, and the purification of a mitzorah, and lifting of the hands for the priestly benediction, whether inside or outside the temple. All these rituals may only be done by priests. From where is it derived that this law also includes one who does not admit to the validity of these rites? And the verse states, among the sons of Aaron, teaching that with regard to any sacrificial rite that is entrusted to the sons of Aaron, i.e. the Kohanim, the priests, any priest who does not admit to its validity does not have a portion in the priestly gifts, since the pouring of the oil is included in the list of sacrificial rites entrusted to the priests. According to Rabbi Shimon, the offering should not be fit if that service was performed by a non-priest. Rav Nachman said, nah, this is not a problem, not difficult, la kasha. There in the B'Raisa, Rabbi Shimon is referring to the meal offering of priests, whereas here in the Mishnah, the context is a meal offering of a Yisrael, of a regular Jew. In the case of a meal offering of a Yisro, which is one that requires the removal of a handful to be burned on the altar, a verse teaches that from the stage of the removal of the handful onward, the rites performed with the meal offering are solely the mitzvah of the members of the priesthood. Therefore, this verse also teaches that the pouring of the oil and the mixing, rites which are performed before the removal of the handful from the meal offering, are valid even if performed by a non-priest. By contrast, the meal offering of priests, which is one that does not require the removal of a handful, as the entire meal offering is burned on the altar, requires that, from the outset, the rites must be performed by a member of the priesthood. Otherwise, it would be unfit. Rava said to him, after all, in the case of the meal offering of priests, from where was it included that there is an obligation to pour the oil? It is derived from the law of the meal offering of a Yisrael, where this law is stated explicitly. Therefore, just as there the rite is valid when performed by a non-priest, so too here the rite is also valid when performed by a non-priest. And there are those who say the discussion took place as follows. Rav Nachman said, this is not difficult. Here, when the Mishnah teaches that a meal offering is fit if the oil was poured by a non-priest, it is referring to meal offerings from which a handful has been removed. Whereas there, in the Baraisa that lists the pouring of the oil as one of the rites performed by the priest, it is referring to meal offerings from which the handful is not removed. Rava said to him, after all, in the case of meal offerings from which a handful is not removed, like the meal offering of the priest, from where is it included that there is also an obligation to pour the oil? It is derived from meal offerings from which a handful is removed, where this law is stated explicitly. Therefore, the law with regard to meal offerings from which a handful is not removed is like the law with regard to those from which a handful is removed. And just as there, the rite is valid when performed by a non-priest, so too here the rite is also valid when performed by a non-priest. So rather, since Rava deflected Rav Nachman's explanation of the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in the Baraisa, it is clear that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, meaning our Mishnah disagrees with the idea that those steps that Rabbi Shimon included, saying it had to be done by a priest, our Mishnah is not in agreement with Rabbi Shimon, and so it's possible that our Mishnah is saying that all these things have to be done, but they can be done by a non-priest. The Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of the rabbis who hold that the offering is fit even if the oil was poured by a non-priest? And the verse states, quote, and he shall pour oil upon it and put frankincense upon it, and he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests, and he shall remove his handful. From here it is derived that from the removal of the handful onward, the rites of the meal offering are solely the mitzvah of the members of the priesthood. But before the handful is removed, all the steps that come before that can be done by a non-priest. Therefore, this verse also teaches that the pouring of the oil and the mixing, which are rites performed before the removal of the handful, are valid even if performed by a non-priest. And the Gemara asks, and what would Rabbi Shimon say in response? Since this doesn't agree with him, so what would Rabbi Shimon say? Well, he would say that when it states Aaron's sons, the priests, the verse is interpreted as referring to the matter that precedes it and to the matter that succeeds it. Before mentioning the priests, the verse states the law of pouring the oil on the meal offering, and after mentioning the priests, it states the law of the removal of the handful. Therefore, a priest is required for each of these rites, according to Rabbi Shimon. We're on page 19a now. Now, the Gemara questions this explanation. And does Rabbi Shimon hold that a verse is interpreted as referring to the matter that precedes it and the matter that succeeds it? But isn't it Tana Baraisa that the verse states, and the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the corners of the altar? And the term with his finger is interpreted as referring to the term and the priest shall take. And this teaches that the collection of the blood shall be performed only with the right hand, since the term finger, when stated in the context of sacrificial rites, is always referring to the finger of the right hand. And the term with his finger is also interpreted as referring to the term and put it, and this teaches that the placing of the blood on the altar should only be performed with the right hand. So how is this relevant? So Rabbi Shimon said, but is the term hand stated with regard to the collection of the blood? Since the term hand is not stated with regard to the collection of the blood, only with regard to the placement of the blood, then even if the priest collected the blood with his left hand, the offering should be fit. And Abaye said, Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis disagree with regard to whether a verse is interpreted as referring to a matter that precedes it as well as a matter that succeeds it, right? What they're disagreeing is, once you introduce who we're talking about and what specifically he needs to do, that are we only going to apply that to laws which are, downstream of that statement in the Torah? Can it apply to matters which are upstream, right? Written in the Torah before this statement that we just came to. And Abaye said Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis disagree with regard to whether a verse is interpreted as referring to the matter that precedes it and the matter that succeeds it. The rabbis hold that the term with his finger is referring to both the term and the priest shall take that precedes it and the term and put it that succeeds it. And Rabbi Shimon holds that a verse is interpreted as referring to the matter that succeeds it, but not interpreted as referring to the matter that precedes it. In that case, Rabbi Shimon's opinion that the pouring of oil must be performed by a priest can no longer be ascribed to the opinion that the phrase Aaron's sons, the priests, should be interpreted as referring to the description of pouring the oil that came before this description came in the Torah. So rather, this is the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon. The verse states, and he shall pour oil upon it and put frankincense upon it, and he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests. He therefore employs the principle that the conjunction and, which is a prefix to just the letter vav, adds to the previous matter, demonstrating that the rite of pouring the oil must be performed by the priests, which would be contrary to what the rabbis in our Mishna are saying. And the Gemara asks, but does Rabbi Shimon hold that the letter vav adds to the previous matter? If that is so, then this would pose a problem with regard to another law that he derives, that which is written, quote, and he shall slaughter the bull before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sacrifice the blood and sprinkle the blood. Is that something that anyone can slaughter the bull, but Aaron and his sons have to present the blood? Or is this saying that Aaron and his sons must also slaughter the bull? The sages infer from here that from the stage of the sacrificing of the blood, which begins with the collection of the blood and onward, it is a mitzvah exclusively of the priesthood. And by inference, this teaches that the slaughter of the offering, which is performed earlier, is valid when performed by a non-priest. If, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the letter vav adds to the previous matter, well then, if the slaughter of the offering is performed by a non-priest, it should also be unfit, according to Rabbi Shimon. And it's not. So the Gemara answers, well, there, with regard to the slaughter of an offering, it is different. As earlier the verse states, and he shall place his hands upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. And he shall slaughter the bull before the Lord. Associating the placing of hands, semicha, on the head of an offering, which is performed by the owner of the animal in conjunction with a priest, by the owner of the animal with the slaughter of the offering. Therefore, just as this placing of the hands on the offering is performed by non-priests, so too the slaughter of the offering is performed by non-priests. Okay, the priest doesn't have to have his hands on the animal, just the owner does. And that can be a non-priest, and therefore the slaughter can be done by non-priests. There's an additional factor here besides whether there was a vav and whether it was stated right next to but before, and whether we can add that to the requirements in this situation. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara asks, if there is a juxtaposition of the placing of the hands and the slaughter of the animals, why not also say that just as the placing of the hands on the offering is performed only by the owner of the animal, so too the slaughter of the offering may be performed only by the owner of the animal, right? The owner has to do smicha on his offering, but the owner does not have to be the one who slaughters. A non-priest can slaughter, but it doesn't have to be the owner. And why not? Right. So the Gemara answers, you cannot say that due to a kal v'chomer inference from the law of the sprinkling of the blood. And just as the sprinkling of the blood, which is an essential rite that enables the one who brings the offering to achieve atonement, does not require the owner to perform it, as the priest performed this rite on his behalf. With regard to the slaughter of the offering, which is not the essential rite that enables the one who brings the offering to achieve atonement is not all the more so clear that it does not need to be performed by the owner. It's essential to the overall procedure to slaughter the animal in order to collect the blood, but the dispositive step that affects atonement is sprinkling the blood on the altar. And if you would say that one cannot derive the possible from the impossible, and the owner may not sprinkle the blood as he is not a priest, but he may still be obligated to slaughter the animal, as this rite may be performed by a non-priest, well, the merciful one revealed in the Torah in the context of the Yom Kippur service with regard to the high priest, and he shall slaughter the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself. By inference from the fact that the verse specifies that here the high priest, who is the owner of the offering, must perform the slaughter, it is clear that usually the slaughter does not require the participation of the owner. It can be done by a non-priest, and it does not have to be the owner. That's where we'll knock off. Just seeing one question. Sharon, wasn't there an issue when Aaron did not eat sacrificial meat and allowed it to burn on the altar after the deaths of his sons? And Aaron obliquely alluded to his state of mourning, and Moses acquiesced. Yes, right? But, and I think, are you asking, he knew he wasn't going to eat it at the time that he slaughtered, he was going to leave over. And then how does that affect our analysis here? But I think we would also have to say that's an exceptional situation, right? First of all, can we learn out practices for, the ensuing thousands of years from the original inauguration of the Mishkan in the desert? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. And second, that was a situation where, they were acute mourners. Aaron because he had lost his son, the other two sons because they had lost their brother. And that's going to change the situation. And Aaron understood the law better than Moses. But is that going to be comparable to having a plan at the outset to leave the blood over or to leave the edible portion uneaten? And by the way, we don't know that it was left over beyond its time, right? It might just be that I'm not going to be able to eat it because I'm an unain, but we're going to burn it. We're not going to leave it over beyond its time, right? There's definitely other possibilities here beside the simple contradiction to what we're learning elsewhere. And Sharon also says, from my husband, Rabbi Shimon holds that the priests can't get their portion of a sacrifice unless they believed. Doesn't that incentivize them to just go through the motions? I mean, there's always the possibility that somebody is going to just go through the motions, but that doesn't change what the law actually is, right? So if they can get to the bottom of it, that the priest doesn't believe in the validity of the laws which would grant him these gifts, then he's not going to get them. Or maybe he himself, is going to be a person of integrity. He's going to say, I just don't believe this. And then they're going to say, okay, you don't believe it. You're not going to get the priestly gifts. Whether the practical application results in the desired outcome or a cheating outcome is, a separate issue than what is the law, right? And this sounds like it's not a policy matter. It's not a rabbinic decree in order to create a policy, and you're saying it would have unintended consequences. I think what they're saying is by Torah law, if the priest doesn't hold by the Torah laws that grant him those portions, then he doesn't come within the Torah law that would grant him those portions. And that's why I wouldn't receive. That's the way I'm reading it. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together tomorrow, Thursday, regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.